Today we're doing something a little different. We're going to be looking at, well, the two dominant geopolitical operating systems in the world today.
Right. And we're not just talking about, trade wars or tariffs. We're trying to cut through all that noise.
Exactly. We want to look at something much more foundational, how power actually gets used and what gets built, or maybe more importantly, what doesn't get built as a result.
We're really dissecting the core governance models of the United States and China. And what's so striking when you get beneath the surface, beneath all the political tension, is how similar they are in some ways.
Similar. How so?
Well, they're both fundamentally pragmatic, materialistic. They're both intensely confident in their own unique brand of power.
And they both have this almost spiritual appreciation for technology, for grand projects that push the limits of what's possible.
Absolutely. That awe of the technological sublime. They both have that engineering gene deep down.
But, and this is the whole point of our deep dive today, their approach to governing, to actually getting things done, is just, it's fundamentally opposed.
Which is why we're framing this as a struggle between two big ideas: the Chinese engineering state versus the U.S. lawyerly society.
And our mission here is to really understand that terrifying speed of China, that outcomes-first mentality, which, is often achieved at a really immense human cost.
And then contrast that directly with the procedural paralysis we so often see in the U.S., a system that frequently sacrifices speed and even results for a process that's all about checks and balances.
So our source material for this is a close reading of a lot of investigations into China's pursuit of engineered greatness, this relentless, almost paranoid drive coming straight from Beijing.
And if there's one idea you need to hold on to throughout this entire conversation, it's this. When you look at China, you have to understand that things can be getting better and getting worse at the same time.
That's such a critical point.
It really is. The quality of life for hundreds of millions of people can be shooting up because of new infrastructure, a new bridge, a new highway.
While at the very same moment, the weight of authoritarian political control is just crushing individual spirit and creative energy.
Exactly. That dual reality is what makes it so complex.
Okay, so let's set the stage then. Let's unpack this governance divide, and let's start with the system that seems to be slowing down, the lawyerly society here in the U.S.
Right. And the evidence that the U.S. is run by lawyers, it's overwhelming, frankly. You look at the top ranks of American government, and what do you see?
Lawyers.
Lawyers, almost exclusively. Historically, 5 of the last 10 American presidents went to the law school.
And Congress.
Any given session, at least half the members hold law degrees. It's just the default path to power in America.
And the contrast, when you look for the engineers in that mix, is, well, it's pretty stark.
It's incredible. Our sources point out that only 2 American presidents were actual engineers. Herbert Hoover, who was a mining executive.
And Jimmy Carter, a nuclear submarine officer.
And politically, how are they remembered? For their dismal political instincts, both suffered these huge electoral defeats. It really seems like the skill set for navigating Washington is completely different from the skill set for, say, building a bridge.
Or designing a nuclear reactor.
Yeah. But it wasn't always this way, and that's a key piece of the story. The U.S. absolutely used to have the muscle of an engineering state.
Oh, for sure. You think about the 19th century railroads, the huge dams of the New Deal.
The interstate highway system under Eisenhower in the 50s, those were colossal projects driven by people who were focused on physical limits, on materials, on the pragmatic goal of just connecting the country.
So what happened? When did the whole system shift? Why did the engineers lose out to the lawyers?
The pivot point seems to be after the 1960s. You had a generation that saw the ugly side of that unchecked industrial boom.
Right. The byproducts, the environmental damage, rivers catching fire.
And these massive highways just being jammed right through the middle of vibrant urban neighborhoods. The public, especially the intellectual elite, became really alarmed by the lack of accountability.
So the solution they came up with was, what? More regulation.
Exactly. The legal elite saw the problem not as a failure of engineering, but as a failure of process. So their focus shifted, and it shifted dramatically toward litigation and creating regulatory hurdles.
And the mission became?
The unstated mission, as our sources put it, became to stop as many things as possible. The goal was to make sure that no dam, no highway, no factory could ever be built again without this exhaustive, painful public review.
And that leads us right to the core problem, which we could call the procedure fetish.
Yes, the elevation of process over outcomes.
So every time there's a new problem, the solution is just another procedure.
It's the default institutional response. More bureaucracy, more studies, more opportunities for judicial review, and government agencies just get completely tied down by these mountains of procedure.
They have to do what? Conduct every possible study.
Ventilate every option, engage every identifiable stakeholder, and then weather the most stringent judicial review before any action, no matter how trivial, can actually take effect.
That sounds absolutely exhausting. And the result is that even a tiny decision, like putting up a new bike lane, becomes a legal minefield.
It's a massive vulnerability. The sheer volume of law means that any single person or group with enough money for a good lawyer can find some procedural hook to tie up a project for years, sometimes decades.
So a lawyer has more power to stop something than to build something.
Exponentially more power. The second a shovel hits the dirt, you can bet the lawsuits are coming.
And what's the long-term cost to society from all this paralysis?
You see it everywhere. Decaying infrastructure, we can't build enough housing to meet demand, and there's this pervasive feeling across the country that nothing really works anymore.
It's what the sources call a low-agency society.
Exactly. We know what we need to do, build mass transit, modernize the grid, but the system itself just prevents us from doing it. And, critically, these failures hurt working people the most, the people who actually rely on public works and affordable housing.
Okay, this context makes the comparison with China, with the engineering state, just absolutely devastating. And there's a perfect direct comparison point from 2008. High-speed rail.
The high-speed rail story is maybe the single most dramatic illustration of the speed difference between these two models. So 2008, both California voters and the Chinese central government decide to move forward with high-speed rail lines.
And they were remarkably similar in length, right? About 800 miles.
Yep. California was aiming to connect San Francisco, and LA China was targeting the Beijing-Shanghai corridor.
China's result is it's staggering to even think about. They didn't spend years deliberating.
Right.
The Politburo settled the strategy. They just executed.
And the Beijing-Shanghai line opened just 3 years later, 2011. It cost about $36 billion, and in its first decade, it carried 1.35 billion passengers.
1.35 billion. So prove that the state can actually deliver something people desperately need.
Now let's look at the lawyerly society's response in California. It's been 17 years since that vote.
And what's been built?
They've only managed to complete a small, isolated stretch of track connecting two cities in the Central Valley, Bakersfield and Merced. It's nowhere near the big cities.
And the cost hasn't exactly stayed at $36 billion.
Not even close. The cost has ballooned to an estimated $128 billion.
That's unbelievable for a partial line that doesn't even connect the major cities. And the sources point to two big institutional reasons for this, right? And they perfectly illustrate the flaws.
The first one is just relentless political meddling. The original route, the one designed by engineers for efficiency, was thrown out.
Why?
Because politicians in the state demanded extra stops in their districts. So the route had to be changed to this much more difficult, much more expensive path. It actually forces the train through an extra mountain range.
So you're adding tunnels, bridges, years of delay, all for political gain. The focus shifts from engineering to vote buying.
Exactly. And the second driver is this tendency to prioritize social engineering over actual construction.
What do you mean by that?
The California Rail Authority, when they have to defend the budget and the delays, they don't talk about how much track they've laid. That's the outcome.
They talk about the process.
Right. They prefer to talk about the number of high-paying union jobs they're creating. The focus is on maximizing social benefits within the process, and that often sacrifices the core goal, which is to build a train line on time.
So it creates a system where everyone's trying to get their piece of the pie procedurally, and the project itself just grinds to a halt.
And the timeline is just, think about this. The official estimate for opening even that partial leg in California is sometime between 2030 and 2033.
So the margin of error for opening a small stretch of track is the same amount of time it took China to build the entire 800-mile line.
That is the raw, brutal cost of delay in a lawyerly society.
And on the other side, you have China, the engineering state.
Yeah.
It's defined by its ability to deliver these monumental projects at a speed that's just unmatched.
And that speed comes directly from its political structure. The strategy is decided at the very top, the Politburo, which is about 24 men.
And once they decide,
That's it. The bureaucracy is monolithic. It's all directed toward that one goal. There's no public comment period that can stop it, no real judicial review. The bureaucracy's only job is to figure out the construction details.
and the results of that focus are just They're astounding. They've basically compressed over a century of American construction into a couple of decades.
Take their highway system. China's expressway network surpassed the total length of the entire U.S. interstate system back in 2011.
And that was just the first round.
That was the first batch. By 2020, they had finished a second batch of expressways, again, totaling the length of the U.S. system, but they built that second batch in half the time it took to build the first.
It's like they're learning and getting exponentially faster.
That's the process learning in action. And you see the same pattern with something like nuclear power. The U.S. has 54 commercial nuclear plants.
And China now has 55, so they've caught up in raw numbers.
But the real difference is in the pipeline. It's the intent to build. China has 31 more nuclear plants under construction right now.
Versus just one in the United States.
Just one. So when China's economy shows the slightest tremble, if the stock market wobbles or consumption lags, Beijing's immediate knee-jerk reaction is always the same.
Announce a mammoth new public works plan.
They solve financial problems by pouring concrete. It's the engineering state's core belief in physical solutions.
Okay, let's transition. Because this incredible speed brings us right into the second part of our deep dives. The sheer scale of the building and where that line between an engineering marvel and just monumental waste start to get really blurry.
Right. And to really illustrate the scale, our source material has this fantastic anecdote from the author's bicycle trip through Guizhou province.
And you have to understand, Guizhou is one of China's fourth poorest provinces. Its household income is something like 1/15 of New York State's. It's mountainous, historically very isolated.
So logically, you'd expect, crumbling roads, minimal infrastructure.
But what the author found was a level of physical dynamism that just completely surpasses what you see in America's richest states.
That's that getting better and getting worse, contradiction in action. Guizhou is now home to 45 of the world's 100 highest bridges.
45. In one province.
A collection of engineering feats that is just unequaled anywhere on Earth.
Yeah.
It has 5,000 miles of expressways. That's a network 3 times the length of New York's entire highway system, and 11 fully operational airports, with 3 more being built.
So this one poor province became an extreme showcase for China's growth strategy.
It was a very conscious push. The goal was to stimulate demand, drive urbanization, and connect the interior to the coast for their export manufacturing strategy. The speed, the scale, it's all intentional.
And you see the psychological effect of that.
Oh, absolutely. Local citizens, even poor villagers, they point to these colossal new bridges and roads with this immense sense of pride. They see it as tangible proof of progress. And that's the core of the Communist Party's legitimacy. We deliver.
And the new connectivity makes all sorts of new economic activity possible, like the story of Jing'an County.
Yeah, this is amazing. It's a landlocked rural county in Guizhou. And yet, because of this new infrastructure, it became the self-styled guitar capital of the world.
Producing 1 in 7 of all guitars globally.
From this one landlocked county. And it's a perfect example of the engineering state when it works. The local government made a concerted effort to lure migrant workers who had learned the craft in coastal factories back home.
And this lined up with a bigger goal from the central government.
Perfectly. There was a state council directive to develop the interior, so the central government sets this grand goal, and the local bureaucracy finds a physical product, in this case guitars, to deliver on that goal.
But, as you warned us, beneath all these gleaming marvels, there's a massive debt burden. Guizhou is now one of China's most indebted provinces.
And this is where the cost of that outcomes-first mentality really hits you. The sheer volume of investment means a lot of these assets are financially dubious.
Like the airports.
The sources point out that 5 of those 11 airports in Guizhou have fewer than a dozen flights a week. They are struggling so hard to recoup the construction costs, and the debt service is just crushing the province.
And this kind of monumental waste isn't an accident. It's actually baked into the political incentive structure.
Precisely. The system promotes local leaders based on hard metrics, economic growth, fixed asset investment during their time in charge. So it creates this irresistible incentive for monumentalism.
For glamorous, high-impact projects that look fantastic on your resume before you get rotated to your next post.
Even if they're a long-term financial disaster. You build something big and impressive, you get your promotion, and you move on before the bills come due.
And the poster child for this whole system is Li Zayong, the former party secretary of Liu Panshui.
Li Zayong is the perfect example. In just 3 years, he authorized $21 billion in debt for what can only be called vanity projects.
Including replicas of European town squares.
Yep. And most famously, a ski resort in an area that gets very little natural snow.
Mhm.
It had artificial snowmakers, Asia's longest cable lift, the whole 9 yards.
And did any of it actually work?
No.
Yeah.
The fake European squares were pretty quickly taken over by local black goats who used the manicured lawns for grazing.
So you had goats in the town square.
Literally. And the ski resort needed huge subsidies and failed to draw crowds. But Lee's efforts were impressive enough that he actually got promoted to vice governor.
Wow.
It was only when the crippling debt came due that the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection detained him for violations of party discipline. He eventually got a death sentence reprieve.
A death sentence reprieve for building a ski resort where it doesn't snow. I mean, that is the most extreme example of that system backfiring I have ever heard.
And it shows that just having great hardware is useless without the softer stuff that actually matters. You see this in Tianjin, near Beijing. They built what they called China's Manhattan.
A whole forest of new skyscrapers.
Gleaming, brand new, meant to be a global financial hub. But years later, the towers are still mostly empty shells. The hardware is magnificent, but the businesses, the culture, the legal framework, none of it is there.
And the costs aren't just financial. They're environmental and human, too.
Oh, they're massive. This compulsive construction demands staggering amounts of steel and concrete. It makes China the world's largest consumer of both, which contributes massively to smog and means China breathes more coal than the rest of the world combined.
And environmental reviews are secondary.
They're a box to be checked, not a genuine hurdle. Economic goals almost always come first.
And then you have mega projects like the Three Gorges Dam, which really embody that contradiction. They can provide flood relief, which is good.
But then they can worsen drought downstream by changing the river's flow, an unintended consequence.
And then there's the human trauma of forced resettlement. The Three Gorges Dam required moving up to 1.5 million people.
And the state needed to achieve what it called voluntary resettlement rates of 100%.
How is that even possible without mass protests?
Through something the state calls coercive thought work. It's a mix of inducements, like a better house in a new town coupled with threats and intense social pressure. Officials just wear down anyone who resists until they agree to move.
It's the engineering state's brutal efficiency applied to human beings.
Exactly. And finally, the sheer recklessness of the construction, all the cost cutting down the subcontracting chain to meet impossible deadlines, it leads to tragic quality issues.
Like the tofu houses.
The fragile schoolhouses that just collapsed during the 2008 Sichuan earthquake, killing thousands of children while the better-built government buildings right next door were still standing.
And when the parents tried to investigate the corruption that led to that,
They were detained, silenced. It's the ultimate proof that building fast and big does not always mean building well, especially when you have no accountability.
so the engineering state has achieved these marvels, but it's also inflicted incredible harm. And to really get China's long-term challenge to the U.S., we need to pivot from concrete to technology to manufacturing know-how. That's our part 3.
Right. And if the U.S. is still seen, maybe wrongly, as the global capital of virtual digital innovation, China is, without a doubt, the capital of hardware. And the story of Shenzhen really captures that transformation.
In 1980, Shenzhen was just a sleepy fishing village, famous for its oysters.
And today, it's arguably the world's greatest boomtown. It has completely embraced a vision of technology that is physical, that is industrial. It's where the virtual becomes real.
And its success is built on this idea of process knowledge.
This is such a crucial distinction. When most people think of technology, they think of the tools, the hardware, or they think of the instructions, the blueprints.
But the most valuable part is the third piece, the process knowledge.
It's the skill you get from practical, hands-on experience. It's the stuff that's in people's heads. It's the institutional memory of how you turn that blueprint into a functioning product at scale, quickly and efficiently.
And that highlights the core problem for the lawyerly society. The U.S. has just allowed its industrial base to dissolve, and with it, all of that process knowledge.
We prioritized finance and services. Manufacturing employment peaked at 19 million in 1980, and it fell to just 11 million by 2010.
And when those people retire, the knowledge is just gone.
It evaporates. There's this chilling U.S. example of this loss. The National Nuclear Security Administration had to spend $69 million to relearn how to make a classified material.
A material called fog bank for nuclear weapons.
Right. And why did they have to relearn it? Because everyone who knew how to make it had retired or died. The blueprints weren't enough. They had the tools, they had the instructions, but the process knowledge was gone.
Now compare that to Shenzhen, the epicenter of process knowledge. When Apple was scaling up iPhone assembly, they needed about 9,000 industrial engineers.
And Apple's analysts figured it would take 9 months to recruit that many specialized people in the U.S.
And in China.
They staffed the entire requirement in 2 weeks. This incredible concentration of labor, skills, and supply chains is the engineering state's greatest asset.
I remember that story about Tim Cook saying that in the U.S. you might struggle to fill a room with tooling engineers, but in China you could fill football fields with them.
And that ability to scale instantly creates this geometric efficiency. Apple was constantly scrambling for some last-minute component, a weird screw, a custom adhesive.
And in Shenzhen.
Former Apple engineers said they could almost always find a supplier instantly through a guy who knows a guy whose cousin can probably make a few 100,000 of those new screws.
So it collapses coordination time that would take weeks in the U.S. into a single meeting. And as the workers assemble these things, they're constantly gaining new process knowledge.
Right. China's contribution to the iPhone's final value grew from about 4% in 2007, which was mostly just labor,
to around 25% by 2017, because they were now making complex components themselves. They were moving up the value chain.
And the engineering state knew that the know-how was the real prize, not just the assembly jobs. And this recognition is what drives Xi Jinping's strategic doctrine, which our sources call completionism.
This is his focus on the real economy, manufacturing physical products, over what state media calls the fictitious economy, like finance and virtual tech.
Xi is determined to achieve industrial completionism. He wants China to be able to produce something in all 419 industrial product categories that the UN maintains.
So he sees manufacturing capacity as the foundation of national strength.
The ultimate foundation. Manufacturing is a staggering 28% of China's GDP. Compare that to 10% in the US and the UK.
That's a huge difference in economic structure. He's actively fighting against global economic logic.
He is. Xi has said, the real economy is the basis of everything, so we must never deindustrialize. He rejects the idea of comparative advantage, where you let low-end industries move out. He wants to keep everything within China's borders.
And what's so fascinating is how the state sometimes uses capitalist competition to achieve its goals. The Tesla case in Shanghai is a perfect example.
It's a brilliant and ruthless piece of statecraft. In 2018, Beijing did something it had never done before. It let Tesla fully own its Shanghai plant.
Without a domestic partner, which was always the rule, why would they give that advantage to a huge American rival?
It was a very conscious strategy to create what's called a catfish effect.
A catfish effect?
Yeah. You throw a catfish into a tank of sluggish fish to make them more active. Tesla's entry forced domestic companies like BYD to immediately raise their game, to compete, to innovate faster.
So it wasn't just about Tesla. It was about stimulating the entire Chinese EV ecosystem.
Exactly. And it worked. China's massive workforce, over 100 million in manufacturing, is constantly fueling new process knowledge. This density and this strategic focus are making China a true tech superpower in clean tech, in EVs, and robotics.
That success on the hardware front is undeniable. But now we have to pivot to where the engineering state's methods move from building things to controlling people. And this is where we see its most spectacular and most traumatizing failures.
Yeah, Part 4 covers the massive social engineering campaigns, specifically the one-child policy and zero COVID. And these are critical because they show the core hubris of the engineering state.
Which is what?
The belief that human beings are not individuals with rights and complexity, but are just variables or aggregates that you can centrally control, like a machine or a missile trajectory.
And the one-child policy, which lasted for 35 years, had this chillingly technocratic origin. It was pushed by a missile scientist, Song Jian.
Song Jian literally applied concepts from cybernetics, the study of control in machines, to population growth. He was convinced you could control a population's trajectory with the same mathematical precision as a missile's.
But what's the fundamental flaw in applying that to people?
His models were totally deterministic. They assumed linear growth, fixed resources, and they completely ignored basic sociology, namely that fertility rates naturally fall as education and wealth increase.
So the policy wasn't even necessary.
It was already happening. Fertility rates were plummeting in China from 6.0 children per woman in 1970 to 2.7 in 1980 before the policy was even implemented.
But the state enforced it with terrifying efficiency.
The human trauma is just, the numbers are horrific.
Yeah.
321 million abortions, 108 million sterilizations over 35 years. For rural families who relied on sons for security, the pressure was just unbearable.
And that pressure led to mass female infanticide, which distorted the sex ratio.
Hugely. It reached 120 boys for every 100 girls in the early 1990s. And the state would impose these impossible choices on people and then ironically blame the infanticide on feudal practices instead of their own policy. It left these deep psychological scars across generations.
And the ultimate failure is that it made China grow old before it grew rich. It destroyed the demographic foundation for future growth.
And now you see the irony playing out. The fertility rate is down to 1.0, way below replacement. And the state is frantically trying to use its engineering tools, propaganda, incentives to promote births. She is advising women to build families.
But the dial cannot be turned back.
You can't. You see the physical results. Maternity wards are shutting down, and adult diapers are expected to outsell baby diapers by 2025. You can engineer concrete, but you can't engineer the human soul.
And that same hubris found its most recent expression with zero COVID, especially the 2022 Shanghai lockdown of 25 million people. The state tried to control a modern, complex city like it was a petri dish.
It was the ultimate disastrous campaign. The first phase was a masterpiece of central planning that immediately devolved into total logistical collapse. The government promised food deliveries, but the centralized system just couldn't handle it, and residents were left hungry.
And this time, it wasn't just the poor. The wealthy and powerful were hungry too.
Right. And the supply chain broke down not for lack of food, but because the state's own rigid rules made it impossible for truckers to enter the city. They were afraid of getting quarantined, so they just quit. Trucking activity dropped to 15% of normal.
The system created its own failure.
And this is where civil society, the thing the state constantly tries to suppress, stepped in to save the day.
Through group buying on WeChat.
Exactly. Residents, hungry because of the state's failure, organized themselves. They used their hyper-local buying power to place huge bulk orders directly with wholesalers, completely bypassing the broken government system. It was bottom-up organization that saved people.
And the absurdity of the control mechanisms.
Right.
The daily mass testing, summoned by bullhorns or drones.
And the final awful irony is that it probably made things worse. Forcing elderly people into crowded elevators for daily testing likely spread the virus during the lockdown. And people complied not out of love for the government, but because the government had spent 2 years telling them the virus was deadly, and they were terrified of being hauled off to a quarantine facility.
And then, after all that financial stress, it cost an estimated 1.8% of China's GDP. It all just ended. Suddenly.
It was an abrupt Orwellian U-turn. Overnight, the propaganda shifted from, the virus must be stomped out, to, it's just a cold, take personal responsibility. The engineering state showed it can enforce total compliance, but it has no idea how to manage a graceful retreat when a strategy fails.
That inability to course correct, that lack of adaptability brings us right to our final section. The limits of the engineering state and the lessons for the lawyerly society.
And the most potent sign of those limits is the run movement run. It's a slang word that sounds like the English word run, and it means to emigrate.
And this desire to flee isn't just about poverty. It's about feeling smothered by political controls and this unwelcome tendency to inflect every future scenario with a sense of catastrophe. You just never know when the state will turn on your industry next.
So you're seeing an exodus at both ends of the spectrum. Wealthy Chinese are leaving in droves, an estimated 15,000 millionaires in 2024 alone. But at the same time, less fortunate Chinese are taking that dangerous trek across the U.S. southern border.
38,000 apprehended in 2024. They are voting with their feet for a system with less political interference.
And you see the creative class, the young entrepreneurs, they're running to places like Chiang Mai in Thailand, rejecting the corporate grind and the censorship. I mean, the state crushed the entire domestic comedy industry over a single joke about the military.
That is the control neurosis in a nutshell.
And that neurosis is the engineering state's fatal flaw. It fundamentally limits human flourishing. Funding for natural sciences thrives. Physics and engineering aren't innately political, but free thought is suppressed everywhere else. This deep distrust of its own people is the single biggest brake on China's ambition.
It's the great irony of their central planning. Xi's diagnosis is often, 60% correct. Big tech did have too much power. But his brute force, engineering solutions, crushing digital platforms, freezing the property market, they just traumatize entrepreneurs and make things worse.
The leadership is just too afraid of the Chinese people to let them flourish on their own. And that lack of agency is the critical vulnerability.
So we've laid out these two systems, one too fast and brutal, the other too slow and paralyzed. What does this all teach the lawyerly society in the U.S.?
The big lesson is that the lawyerly society cannot afford its current procedural paralysis if it wants to meet modern challenges, especially the biggest physical challenge of our time, decarbonization.
Right. Decarbonization requires the U.S. to rediscover its engineering state muscle. You can't hit climate goals without building on a massive scale. Solar farms, offshore wind, and especially huge new electrical transmission lines.
And this is exactly where the lawyerly society actively prevents progress. The source material cites the infuriating case of Cape Wind in Massachusetts. A developer tried to build the first U.S. offshore wind project.
And wealthy, mostly liberal residents on Cape Cod, including the Kennedy family, used lawyers to challenge it.
They didn't challenge the need for clean energy, they challenged the procedure.
And after 16 years of lawsuits and delays,
The developer gave up. And in those same 16 years, China built 2/3 of the world's wind and solar plants. That is the lawyerly society protecting the aesthetic preferences of the wealthy over essential national construction.
but we have to acknowledge that the procedure fetish is also a defense mechanism. It's what stops the state from forcibly moving 1.5 million people for a dam, which is the cost we saw in China.
That's true. The challenge isn't just cutting rules, it's creating a system where speed and accountability can coexist. And that means reviving the government's ability to do great works, like the Manhattan Project or Rickover's nuclear navy.
But to do that, you have to tackle the mountains of procedure that tie the hands of civil servants. You have to give them agency to execute.
We need to shed this self-regard that just because we're rich and have great universities, that's enough to stay a superpower when we can't even build a high-speed rail line.
So what's our enduring advantage?
It's pluralism. It's adaptability. While China gains manufacturing muscle, our strength is in our values, which give citizens agency and, crucially, a better potential for course correction. The engineering state is defined by its inability to adapt.
So the U.S. can look to its own history to rediscover how to build, while recognizing that the pluralism that draws fleeing Chinese millionaires and struggling migrants is the ultimate foundation of our power. It gives people agency.
Ultimately, the engineering state faces this fundamental contradiction. Its reckless social engineering is pushing its best and brightest to run, but its focus on manufacturing continues to strengthen its technological base. The lawyerly society has better long-term potential, but risks decay because it's forgotten how to build its own future.
It's a compelling and, frankly, terrifying juxtaposition. And to leave you with one final thought, something that builds on this idea of constant striving. China recently declared that it will always be a developing country.
Yeah, they often use that politically to get better trade terms, but philosophically, it's a really powerful statement.
And it makes you wonder, is it wiser for a nation to always see itself as striving, as transforming, as developing, rather than resting on developed status, which sort of implies you're done, finished, at the end of the road?
The U.S. might need to recognize that if it stops its own transformational urge, if it lets procedural paralysis win, it risks becoming this beautiful, historic, but ultimately finished mausoleum. The key to the future might not be declaring victory, but constantly striving to develop.